Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We will be starting in 1 minute. Hello, everyone. My name is Anurag Dhawan, and I'm the External Relations Officer at University of Toronto, Scarborough. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to our first ever hashtag event. Before I introduce our speaker for today, a few housekeeping announcements. I request if all attendees can please keep themselves on mute through the session. We will have some time to take questions at the end of the presentation via chat, so if you can please drop your questions there. We are also recording this session, and the recording would be mailed out to all attendees. And now to introduce our special guest for today, Adam Rodricks. Adam is a UTSC management grad and an international award-winning social media strategist. He's currently the national lead of digital marketing services at KPMG Canada and has spent the last decade working as a digital and social strategist with brands such as Toronto Star, American Express, and Staples. Without further ado, it's over to you, Adam.
Thank you so much. What a fantastic intro. Hopefully you can all hear me and see me okay. You can feel free to affirm that with some sort of emoji in chat if you like. I'm excited to be here. I'm elated to really just to welcome you to this exciting new initiative that's being put on by the Department of Management. Thanks, Iska. The Department of Management Co-op in partnership with the Marketing Group, connecting our undergrads with marketing leaders across digital, social, brand, and beyond. And I have to tell you, I woke up this morning and I really just felt like I related more to that former group of students than I did the latter group of industry experts, because it wasn't long ago that I was more closely identified with you guys. I mean, I'm basically you plus 10 years. I graduated this month 10 years ago from UTSC with a BBA. And I've spent the last decade climbing the ranks in the industry at a number of different companies, but more on that in a bit. I'd love to say thanks to the folks in the Department of Management and Economics for having me as this inaugural session. I think it was just yesterday, or at least it feels like just yesterday, that I was flying back and forth between the management building and ARC 223. And when I say the management building, I mean the old management building, where I remember walking in for the first time and being like, whoa. And then you guys got this fantastic new building. And then I walked into that to teach one day and I was like, whoa. So it's come so far forward, and it's tremendous. And that's really why I jumped at this opportunity to essentially to be here with you today, to give back. Because as U of T students, I don't think we just attend school, we become part of a family. And it's a network of incredibly accomplished individuals who will stay connected long after they graduate and help each other to prosper for many years to come. And this is one of the ways that I essentially put my money where my mouth is with that. You know, I mean, there's no payment here, right? There's nothing other than some time to give back to this. And I often think about why I do it. And it's because so many people in faculty at U of T invested in me during my time there. But the thing that really warms my heart is how many of them have stayed in touch with me now, and they continue to invest their time and their effort into me. So I really do hope that you too consider this to be an extension of a family. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the digital marketing funnel. We're going to be talking about the various stages of lead generation, what strategies work and where, and then the best practices to nurture customers through the purchase decision and become a brand advocate. Now, you may be looking at this title visual and thinking to yourself, okay, is this meant to be symbolic? Like, is he saying that restaurants nurture patrons to become lifelong customers? Or is he saying how a funnel cake is kind of like, it's like a cocktail of deliciousness? Much like the marketing funnel is a cocktail of tactics that can help us. And to be honest, I just like funnel cake. And if you don't like that joke, or you're wondering who could possibly entrust someone with such deplorable dad jokes to lead a session like this, I suppose I should start at the beginning by at least telling you a little bit about my journey from the classroom to the industry. And I'm so glad, Christine, hi. I'm so glad that somebody else agrees that funnel cake is amazing. I cannot wait till the world reopens and I can go promptly to Canada's Wonderland and get myself some. Okay, so when I think back on my story, I really can't think of a more appropriate group to share it with than this group sitting here with me right now, and that's really because it all began at UTSC. Whenever I wasn't on campus or taking part in some awesome extracurriculars like MESA, and I wish the marketing group was around back then, but alas, like I would head home and I would throw myself quite wholly into one of my many passions, most namely video games. And it wasn't enough for me to simply play these video games. I'd have to take it online to discuss them right after. And as a pretty broke university student, I would be furious whenever I invested in a game and I was robbed of what little disposable income I had. And as a result of that, I became extremely vocal online about the value or the mileage I was getting out of certain video games. And there were a lot of similarly broke college and university students who developed trust with me because they said, okay, if Adam is saying this game is worth it, it probably is worth it. And through that online activation and trust building, I got the attention of a pretty big name in the industry. I really hope that most of you would know that my little plumber friend here isn't just a cute toy. He's representative of one of the biggest video game brands in the world, Nintendo. And they reached out to me and they said, we would love for you to take what you're doing with your online presence and bring it on to our platform and become Canada's first Nintendo Forum moderator. Now, I'm not sure if any of you use platforms like a forum, maybe something like a Red Flag Deals, for example, but if you think about it, it really was like the first iteration of social media. Because what is a forum? It's groups of like-minded individuals who gather online and they discuss purchases or decision making, and that conversation is usually moderated or more apropos for present times, influenced or steered by somebody whose task is essentially to promote the quality interaction and at times even promote the brand. And here I was thinking that Nintendo just hired me to put the letter U in words like color. Now, moving forward from there, that brand affiliation to Nintendo gave me a considerable amount of clout online. And I saw my following and my blog readership go from 5,000 to 10,000 to 50,000. Ooh, going to remind you guys to unmute yourselves. So we're going to get a crazy little echo there. I think it stopped almost immediately. That was really good. So as I was saying, my blog went from 5,000 to 10,000 to 50,000 readers to, oh my God, I checked my mail and there is a literal check for ad revenue in there. And I cannot tell you, like that was the best self-taught lesson of a marketing student in 2008, where we weren't even really sure how that worked. And as I said, I was kind of a broke university student too, so it was so appreciated. I was literally ecstatic. No joke, I think I had something like $65 in my bank account at the time. And every month thereafter, I would positively strut to the mailbox to extract that ad revenue check. And as they steadily grew, so did my excitement. And then one day I went to the mail and I pulled out the letter and I extracted what I thought was a check, but it wasn't a check. It was something that we call a cease and desist. Now, I'm sure many of you are very familiar with the term, but for anyone who isn't, it's essentially a very scary lawyer written message sent that says, stop doing that thing, stop doing the thing. And the legal ramifications, if I chose to persist, were more terrifying. And they were represented by a dollar figure that, well, let's just say that there were a lot of zeros behind it. And this represented an important point in my life because I found myself now a fourth year student at UTSC, one semester away from graduating, thinking about getting a job. And when I got this note, it really forced me for the first and the only time in my life to put the muzzle on online. The risk was too high. I had bigger fish to fry. I had to keep my eye on the prize. My priorities needed to shift. And so I sold my blog. But what happens when you stop producing content online? And this directs basically into our digital marketing content for today. When you start to create or when you stop to create content online, does it go away? It doesn't magically disappear. And it most certainly did not in my case, because it became the basis of an online portfolio for job seeking that I wasn't even aware I was putting forward. Okay. And that's critical because I get a lot of questions from students, especially on the brink of graduation. What can I do to essentially get a leg up? And so many of them are under the impression that they need to wait until they've got formal employment to start building a portfolio. And clearly that's not what I did. And I received that first call from these guys. And as some of you have probably guessed, this picture is indicative of the brand Staples. They stumbled across some of my tech reviews that I was doing when I had the blog and my analysis online that essentially got me into hot water, but they had a very different reaction to it. They told me that they loved what I was doing and they wanted to know if I'd be interested in coming on board to play a similar role for their community of employees and their store associates. Now, those of you in school, I get it, especially if you're in marketing. We do not aspire to work at an office supplies company. We don't think that's the end goal. It was a fantastic time in my life, but at the point where I was in fourth year, I was graduating from U of T hoping to work in sexy marketing. I wanted to work for the Nikes or the Starbucks or the Raptors of the world. And somehow this offer, albeit unsolicited and very much needed to work for an office supplies company, didn't quite get me to jump out of my chair. But as I said a little bit earlier, I think I had $65 in my bank account. So of course I accepted. And this is where the digital marketing funnel really first became evident to me. Because one of the first things that I was tasked with when I joined Staples was essentially to foster a community where there was clearly a divide between the corporate office and the stores. And you think to yourself, okay, what stage of the funnel is that? And what is the business problem there? Well, one of the first initiatives that I worked on at Staples was extremely top of the funnel, extremely top of the funnel, where you know you have a real problem just simply generating awareness and you're lacking the audience's attention. If you don't have that audience attention at the very top of the funnel, you aren't even permitted to have the conversation. So my response to this business problem was to essentially work on an internal podcast that we called Behind the Button, like the Staples Easy Button. I hope I'm not dating myself with that reference, and some of you remember that you slapped it. It said that was easy. They had commercials on it in the early 2000s. Thing was awesome. We sold it for a little while. I loved it. It did nothing else, by the way. It was just a button. It was a novelty item, but I loved it. Anyway, I digress. So we created this Behind the Button podcast, and we basically played it company wide. Didn't matter who you were, how senior, how junior, you got access to this every week. And I used that podcast as a catalyst for more content to eventually tease some middle of funnel content like blogs, how-to videos to showcase store wins, and to offer up information on upcoming offers that store employees loved learning about quicker than they would otherwise. One of the best parts about digital is that we can be nimble. Oh, and it's a podcast, so it actually ends up being a lot more engaging than, say, the company newsletter that you've already skimmed through 3 times. And it worked. So I was so happy that it worked that essentially I realized I had proof of case for digital, right? I mean, I'd used podcasts as a mechanism to move down the funnel, but I knew that there were other tactics that I was using more so for my personal means or on my blog that I wanted to bring into the ecosystem. So I shared my metrics with the leadership of the company and I begged them to let me start a corporate Twitter account. Now, they were very savvy even at that time, and they looked at me like, Adam, are you crazy? Do you know what people do on Twitter? And they challenged me with that, and they were absolutely right. People complain on Twitter. That is a lot of Twitter. They weren't wrong. But like I told them, much of the divide that we had started to shift between the stores and corporate, really the remedy to that, the first step towards better quality online engagement had to be us joining the conversation and showing that we were listening. So they greenlit that first social media account for me, and it launched my career in social media. Essentially, from there, I grew at Staples for the next 4 years before taking on a digital strategy position at the Toronto Star, helping them with their big migration to online. And then I consulted for such brands as Air France, American Express, Microsoft. And for the past 5 years, I've worked at KPMG in Canada, where I'm now the national lead of digital marketing. And I oversee social, web, paid media, and SEO. And I think about it so fondly. And I think about that feeling I had this morning because it was a humble beginning in the halls of UTSC as I was sprinting between classes and buildings because I didn't do my timetable properly. And it's all really because I took the initiative to act on a passion and unknowingly turned it into a portfolio. That's really where it all came back from. So that's my story. Whether you love it, whether you hate it, whether you think it's fake or not, I'd love to know. You can message me after the session, and we can geek out on the finer details. But now let's really shift into the meat of today's presentation. And as before we get into the funnel itself, there are questions from students that come up literally every time I do a talk like this. And there are 3 of them that come up so often that I insist on banging them out right now so that we don't have to waste time doing it afterwards. And of course, you can always drop them in the chat. We'll get to them afterwards as well. But let's get to those 3 that always come up, inevitable, right? So the first one, what is the single hottest skill that you're looking for when you're hiring in digital? Is it some sort of design suite like a Photoshop? Is it a programming or a coding language? Is it a piece of analytics software? And the answer is more than a proficiency in any piece of software. I'm looking for those soft skills, those personality traits that show me that you are going to thrive in a fast-paced, ever-changing marketing environment like digital. Because the fact of the matter is, many tools that we use, and I think most social strategists or digital strategists would agree at larger organizations, many tools that we use, they're proprietary in nature. So you don't even have an opportunity to train on those until you join. And for anybody who's ever learned anything themselves through YouTube, you know there is no shortage of access to great resources out there. So what I'm really trying to look at, what the lens that I'm coming at it from, is evaluating how you're going to thrive in a fast-paced, ever-changing market like digital. Okay. Now, the next question that I get all the time, it's about big bets. What is my big bet for 2020 that you should brush up on in terms of your skill set to future-proof it and to make sure that you are attractive to prospective employers? And my answer to that in 2019 is the same one as my answer in 2020, and that's essentially video, right? Video makes up 2/3 of content on the internet, and you don't need to take it from me. Think about your own browsing habits. How far do you need to go down your feed on Instagram, on a Facebook, on a LinkedIn, even on some news outlets before you hit an auto-playing video, right? It is the way that consumers have voted through their clicks and through their marketing funnel actions that they want to receive content. And now, so brands have essentially responded in kind. And that last question, and this is a question that I'm super pumped to present to a student audience because it changes the game. It literally changes the game. There's never been anything like this other than digital marketing. So finally, the question that I get all the time has to do with if we can't measure it, is it really worth having it as part of my digital marketing strategy? And the answer to that was traditionally, no, of course not. I mean, if we can't measure it, we can't iterate for success, and we won't be able to see where our tactics are coming up short to shift those dollars. So, no, absolutely no. Then this new type of media emerged online called dark social. I hope someone online has heard of dark social, but if you haven't, you're going to be hearing a lot more of it. Let me tell you what it is. Dark social refers to all of those great conversations that we have online that essentially we don't have real analytics or insights deeply attached to it. So what's an example of dark social? An expiring Instagram story or a direct conversation on Snapchat. Can we track it? Sort of, but not really from a brand's perspective. But can it shift a purchase decision? You bet. So I love how answers to questions are changing in digital over time, and you get to be at the forefront of that shift. You get to come into organizations and bring value immediately from day one. I hired 2 people in January of this year, and those 2 people, because they were working specifically on social, they essentially had an opportunity to come in and on day one start talking to us about TikTok and Instagram and live streaming. And I can't think of too many industries where you'd step in and on day one, you wouldn't be in a training mode, you'd be in a position to add that value. So that was incredible. Okay, so moving forward, there we go. The last thing that I really want to say, why do we do this? Why do we do any of this? If you're in this session, you may have an aspiration to be a digital marketer, and you might be thinking about how do I essentially quantify my success? What is the ROI of these efforts? And it may seem easy to knee jerk and say, oh, that's easy. You know, we got to make the dollars. If we don't make the dollars, it's not effective. And congratulations, that probably would get you some good marks on a test, for example. But in the real world, the funnel is so much more complicated. I remember the first organization that I joined out of U of T. I sat down, I was in a meeting, they were talking about the funnel, but there was no picture, there was no diagram. And the thing that was even more terrifying about it, their funnel didn't match what I knew as a funnel. It was right then and there that I realized there were so many different versions of it, and there were so many different ways to refer to the different stages of it. So if there's one thing that you learned today, I don't want you to memorize any of the graphs that we're going to look at today. There's no test, right? Essentially, what I would love for you to do is get a better understanding, a deeper understanding of what each of those stages signifies, the tactics that flow into them, and how you flow a prospect or a client from one stage to the next. That is the real meat that you'll be able to take from this presentation, okay? Moving forward. Okay, so I can't tell you how many people pipe up when I ask them about an effective funnel, and they show me they know the terms tofu, mofu, and bofu. And those are great terms, but they don't necessarily lead to strategic marketing without a really good understanding of objectives and the tactics to support them. So for the uninitiated, these These acronyms that may sound like health food to you if you've never heard them before, they actually refer to different phases of the funnel, and they can be categorized by an audience segment or even a persona. So at the very top of your funnel, you're going to look to attract a much larger audience of potential leads because essentially you're working to attract relevant traffic without deliberately filtering or discouraging conversions. Okay. Common examples of tactics at this stage in tofu include a blog article, a webinar, or a social media. And I promise you, even though I said a webinar, I'm not selling you anything. Next, you move down to the most important thing to do, which is tying it back to your objectives. And the way that that tofu content can essentially educate or educate an audience on a specific question. It doesn't necessarily have to be a question they have, right? It could be a need, it could be a pain point that they're looking to address, but without a sales tie-in. And this is critical. You're not doing your hard sell at the top of the funnel. You'll get this opportunity to do it with your MOFU, right? As you kind of segue in. And what is MOFU? The middle of the funnel is essentially what that is. And once your top of funnel lead converts on an initial content offering, they will progress into this middle of the funnel. And this is often viewed in the industry as the most complicated funnel stage because there's broad diversity of interested leads, right? It's not like everybody who's made it to this segment is necessarily of the same persona. So they haven't all been fully qualified. In the middle of funnel stage, your content should really aim to continue to educate, but you have to start to position your company as the solution to the lead's needs and challenges. So, as an example, if somebody's searching for above ground pools, how can you position your content to talk about your products indirectly? Maybe it's by the importance of certain features so it doesn't burst. I don't know a lot about pools, but that's a great example, right? You're talking about adjacent content and you're indirectly talking about your value prop. So great examples of MOFU tactics, include case studies or automated email campaigns, free trials, and of course, targeted content. And then finally, the holy grail, the BOFU or the bottom of the funnel. And I remember spending so much time studying this and then realizing that in practice, it takes a lot of work just to even get here. So it's totally fine to focus your learning on that top of funnel if you so choose. But if you do make it to the end of the funnel and you're focusing on BOFU, well, firstly, congratulations. Once you've attracted a healthy collection of leads with your tofu content, you have essentially continue to engage and warm them up with your MOFU, but now what? Like, what do you do once you're in BOFU stage? It's the most crucial because you're going for the sale. In some cases, BOFU may not consist of content at all because a key criteria of this stage is that it hinges on your lead knowing and in being comfortable with that one-to-one interaction. I repeat, in BOFU, you may not even have content at all, but you may. And this is where you see a lot of e-commerce providers, for example, leveraging tactics like a discount code to stress the urgency around the purchase during that last stage. Now, although the concept of lead nurturing through tofu, mofu, and bofu may sound simple in theory, I promise you it is not. It is something that has evolved over time. It's something that my understanding has deepened as I've gotten exposure to different funnels and different organizations. And now that we've sort of established what a funnel consists of, please let me undermine myself by just throwing holes in what we've learned right here with some caveats of real world companies. Okay. So the first one that's really important, and I never saw this presented to me anywhere. The funnel is essentially a theory. Okay. The objective of a funnel is really to make it more of a cylinder. Why is that? Well, think about it. What are you trying to do? You're trying to move all of those top of line, and I hope you guys can see my hands right now. You're trying to move all of those top of funnel would-be customers into actual customers. And in a perfect world, it would translate, but that's not the reality of any business, right? It's part of a marketer's job to turn as many leads as possible into customers. And that's why we present the funnel as cylindrical in theory, okay? The second thing, and I kind of touched on this in the beginning, I remember this right after graduation, having this stark realization when I was sitting in a meeting, and it reminds me of that meme where there's a cat, or excuse me, it's a dog, and it's sitting in a burning house, and he's like, "This is fine." That was my feeling in the meeting because I realized right then and there that there was no single agreed upon version of the funnel. Some have many stages while others have few. Some have different names and different actions to be taken by the business and the consumer. So if you have a slightly different version or one with different labels, don't sweat it. As I said, the most important thing here is for you to understand the differences from stage to stage and the tactics and the objectives and how they flow. How do you get somebody from one to another? That is the most critical thing for you to take out of this. Okay. Now, this funnel is produced by TrackMaven. So shout out TrackMaven. It's the one that I've taught the most, and it's the one that's ranked true to me the most in terms of the teams that I've worked with. And it's separated into 6 different areas. Each is supported by where your potential customer is in their purchase decision. Now, in my experience, you aren't trying to memorize this to use it most effectively. Okay. You are trying to essentially, and I love that other people like this one too. This is just the one that I gravitate towards the most, and it's really deep in my understanding. But as I said, we're trying to understand through this objectives and flows. So let's do this in a bite-sized format, okay? Let's just look purely at the different stages, not look at the tactics. So awareness. This is where your potential customers are first drawn in. As I said, trust is established, and this is so key, especially when we look at millennials and Generation Z, something that unites us as two adjacent generations. We are detached from institutions. We don't trust the same way that previous generations did. So lead generation takes place in awareness, and info is essentially being collected for lead nurturing. Then we essentially flow it down into the interest stage. Okay, so you've got some of your leads from awareness. That's awesome. But they need to now learn more. They can learn more about your company. They can learn about your products or services, any helpful information that you can provide. And this is a huge opportunity for your brand to develop a relationship. Key, a relationship, and introduce your strategic positioning. There's a huge debate happening right now on LinkedIn that some marketers are doing it wrong because they are totally skipping the interest part of the funnel because they're assuming that when consumers panic, they're ready to buy right away. But think about yourself. Unless it's a product that you already have, like, for example, Lysol wipes, where you know what it does and you probably bought them sparingly before this all happened, you're not necessarily just going to jump to a purchase decision. You still need to go through the funnel. It may be an expedited funnel, but there's still a funnel, right? There's no consumer that ever goes, oh my goodness, I'm going to panic. Let me just buy this thing right now, right? You need to understand the use case. And from there, we move to the consideration phase. And this is the phase that I talk about the most at work. This is the phase that, frankly, I think is a lot of fun because this is the stage where your leads become marketing qualified leads, however you quantify that. And how they're qualified is essentially determining, are they a prospective customer, or do we need to give them more information or share more about our value prop, right? Are they in our consideration set is something you'll often hear in offices. So how you qualify your leads is a broader topic, and it requires much more scrutiny from marketers because if we don't align on our definition of a marketing qualified lead, we've got bigger problems in our marketing funnel, right? Now, once we've got that in place, we move down to intent. And to get to the intent stage, the prospects must demonstrate that they are interested in buying the brand's product. How do they do that? We'll look at that in terms of KPIs and tactics, but this is really an opportunity for marketers to make a strong case for why their product is the best choice for their potential buyer. Okay. And if you don't put that information out there, what are the odds that that prospective buyer may just go to another website, right? If I think of a stat that's now a little bit dated, but it's crazy. I think one of the craziest stats about it is essentially that you are doing 25% of long tail searches every day on Google, and they've never been searched before. And if you think about your own browsing behavior, yeah, you can talk to Google like it's a person now, right? As consumers, we have that choice. I have the ability to go on Google and type in who was the guy in the movie with the thing on his face, and Google's like, bam, that was Nick Cage in Face Off. That is the nature of the world that we live in, and that's where you have to really nurture your connections in the intent stage if you want to move them forward to evaluation. Okay, and in evaluation, you are almost there. In the evaluation stage, buyers are making a final decision about whether or not to buy a brand's products or services. Typically, marketing and sales work together to closely nurture this decision-making process and convince the buyer that their brand's products is the best choice. I say typically because one of the real-world problems that I've experienced, and we're going to get into this at the latter part of the presentation, is that sometimes rather than working in tandem, you get marketing and sales, and they don't, right? They look at ownership. They look at who's to be attributed with this win. And in my experience, anytime that you prioritize collaboration between those two divisions, you're going to move more people down to the final stage, which is the purchase decision. You're here, right? This is the last stage of the marketing funnel. It's where a prospect has essentially made the decision to buy and they turn into a customer. And this is where sales takes part of the purchase transaction. I think that a positive experience on the part of the buyer is so critical here. Like, don't just look at purchase as the finish line. Having a positive and user experience and a customer experience here is great because really good referrals start the funnel again. Okay. And then we go back to the top of the marketing funnel with a nurtured lead. That person has the ability to flow in to become a brand advocate or ambassador. So that's really critical too. Don't look at the bottom of this funnel as the end goal so much as a cycle, ideally. Okay. Now, in addition to the lack of industry alignment on the funnel itself, it also differs a little bit between whether you're talking to a B2C brand or a B2B brand. And I just want to call out a few really good differences between them, in case you're thinking about joining one of these organizations and you're wondering, okay, well, what would the typical process that I'm going to be working on look like? So a few of them are listed here, and I think they're pretty self-explanatory. I want to essentially highlight two. So most B2C consumers, they navigate the funnel alone or with a small group of trusted advisors, usually friends or family. I want to pause here because this is cool and you're at the forefront of this. Essentially, B2C consumers, when we talk about that small group of trusted individuals, you think about the micro influencer model, right? Think about the last time that you voted or you bought a TV or a car. Odds are, unless you're a tech aficionado or an auto aficionado, you probably didn't make that decision in isolation. You probably went out to one or a few trusted individuals, whether it's a parent or a friend, and you said, hey, I'm thinking about buying this car. What do you know about it? And then they have swayed you. Similarly for voting, if you think about how you voted in the last election, were you swayed? Who did you go to for your information, whether that's a person or a media outlet? And that's where B2C really thrives under the emergence of the micro influencer model. So when we think about influencer marketing in particular, that's why we see a lot of B2C brands flocking to it and implementing it as part of their funnel. Now, by contrast, B2B consumers, they typically have a larger cross-departmental buying group. I think the stat is something like 5.4 people on average within an organization are involved in the buying process before it even gets through. And if you think about the various divisions, it's absolutely true, right? You may have the marketer who has the business need, but then they may have to go to procurement, to security, to privacy, to legal, what have you, whatever that is, essentially to bring in new tech, as an example, into an existing ecosystem of the tech stack, it's probably not a decision that one person is able to make in isolation or implement in isolation. And that's a key differentiator between B2C using micro-influencer and B2B, which is really a team play throughout, okay? I hope that's clear. We can obviously come back to the differences there, but I'm going to just plug along in the interest of time. Now, this is the other thing. As I said, in the real world, there are no perfect graphs. I don't know why I thought there would be. And I was sitting in those meetings right out of school like, oh my God, this is fine. This is fine. I'm going to learn this. And I did learn it over time. But I think it's also important to just embrace that, right? This is not perfect. And some experts will go so far as to argue that the marketing funnel itself, it's no longer relevant because the buying process itself is no longer relevant, right? The buying process itself is no longer linear, is essentially what they're arguing. And leads are coming into the funnel at different stages. Why is that happening? Well, in short, internet, right? I mean, we're coming in because people are being referred to by friends and they may already know that they want to buy a brand's product. There are some products, for example, that if I've got someone in my network, they tell me they swear by it, I'm probably not going to do a lot of that research, right? And if you think about an electronic store as an example, think about the way that this non-linear funnel has come into play. We'll use an example like Best Buy, right? If you were to be a fly on the wall in Best Buy in the early 2000s, what did you see a lot of? Well, you saw a lot of blue shirts and you saw a lot of people talking to the blue shirts, a lot of people who were evaluating options to get them into their consideration set. They'd stand there and they'd look at them and say, well, how many customers have returned that one? And then the Best Buy guy would say, oh, this one's got a really, really good response from customers. And that was a really key part of the decision-making or the buying process. Fast forward to now, if you go to a Best Buy or any really big, department store, appliance store, what do you see by contrast? Number one, you're probably seeing a lot fewer of those blue shirts walking around. And number two, the experience for virtually everybody in that store is head down. They're doing the research in front of their product rather than going to the salesperson because they, number one, don't trust the same way that we used to trust, but the buying process is no longer linear, right? Access to information has essentially increased due to the technological advances, which means the rise of the internet, and customers are increasingly doing their own research and depending on that digital content to inform their purchase decisions. So it's worth noting that some experts doubt the approach, saying that brands, they may be putting themselves at the center of the customer journey, but customers, they don't think that way, right? They're not thinking about you, they're thinking about themselves. But at the end of the day, there's no model that's perfect. So the important distinction here is that the customer decision journey and the marketing funnel will be used in perpetuity, probably by marketers. Therefore, it's still relevant. Whichever iteration you're using, as long as it's helping you to understand who your customer is and where they are in that process, what they need next, it's going to be relevant to you. Okay. Now, there is a heated debate. I was talking about it a lot earlier about, what's happening on LinkedIn. Who owns the funnel, right? Who owns the funnel? And I have heard such amazing arguments from both sides of it. One side will argue that consumers have become more dependent on digital content to inform their purchasing decision. So marketers have taken on more responsibility in the funnel as they continue to essentially nurture prospects during the purchasing process. However, there are some who see that the funnel is being split vertically, with both sales and marketing owning that full funnel. And they argue that salespeople are increasingly becoming thought leaders to drive awareness by doing outbound reach. And when I think about the business development folks that I work with, that is so true. I look at them and how they have upskilled has been tremendous. And in this scenario, I think that marketing and sales, they work the best. As I said, when I look at conversions, when I look at the amount of people that convert that funnel to more of a cylinder, what's really critical there is the collaboration between marketing and sales. You really just want to ensure that the customer experience and the user experience is being prioritized, and you're going to have a better time than if you're fighting internally. So that's probably my biggest advice. I know that in theory it all sounds well and good, but we have to put it into practice, right? And I really do believe that all of that is essentially useless until we strategically apply it to the tactics that are going to support it. So to deepen your knowledge, I want to share with you, frankly, just some facts that are really cool water cooler stats at face value. They're just damn interesting. But when you think about them in the context of the marketing funnel, you're probably going to get your brain firing on all sorts of ways that you can incorporate them into your strategy. I know a few of you have side hustles, maybe starting your own online business, maybe you maintain a second Instagram page. Start thinking about how some of these stats I'm about to present could give you some opportunities to change that or act on that, okay? The first one, if we were to take all of the major social networks in the world and we used their user bases and we treated them as citizens of a country, so a population, Facebook would be the largest country in the world. Number 2 and 3 are obviously real countries. Number 4 would be YouTube, which is ironically the number 2 search engine in the world, right? How often are you typing in a Google search and the second result is a video? Number 5, anybody, and just type it in, unmute yourself if you know what number 5 is, if you've seen it before. Please don't say Pengu, it's not Pengu. Anybody? I'll give it a couple seconds. Deborah says Linux, it looks a lot like it. Weibo, QQ. George, my man, that's what I was going for. 10 cents QQ. Daniel, you got it too. Michelle, okay, we got some smart. Look, I teach at another school, so I'm not supposed to show favoritism, but this is why I say U of T students are the sharpest. I'm just going to leave it right there. Yes, QQ. Look at that wall of QQ. I'm not sure if all of you are just now copying George, but whatever it is, I like the savvy. Why is QQ important? There are massive industry trends that we're now seeing in North America that are coming out of QQ. For example, the killer app. We've been talking about the killer app for the better part of a decade or 2 decades, but what's really interesting about what QQ's done with number 6, which is WhatsApp, Facebook-owned WhatsApp, is essentially evolving on the WhatsApp model. And it's not necessarily just QQ, but it's Eastern tech that's influenced us. So it would be something like, for example, I'm talking to Anurag and I say, hey, Anurag, we need milk. And Anurag and I don't even live together. It's pretty clear that we're on different streams at different locations. I don't know why I said that, but that's the use case, right? When we say that in chat, milk is going to show up hyperlinked in our conversation. Clicking on it will add it to my Amazon cart. It then geo targets me and says, okay, based on where Adam is, there are 3 close pickup depots so that he doesn't have to deviate on his way home and everything is seamless. Now, I'm sure if I could see all of your faces, there would be a look of horror on them. And I completely agree. I think that would be an immense infringement on privacy. It's just important for you to understand this is one of the ways that the digital marketing funnel has essentially been condensed, right? If you think about all the different objectives and what you're able to do that with that, that's essentially what it is.
Reassessment to CPA Ontario, as you mentioned earlier, which means you're sending in your job description, and we would be able to confirm whether or not that role is eligible for you to start reporting your practical experience.
I'm going to pause for just a second. Do you mind going on mute, my friend? Thank you kindly. Although I did love that. Can you guys hear me okay? I think we just had a couple of different inputs. Is that better now? Okay,
Yep.
awesome. It's always better when we don't have to play tug of war for the microphone. Okay, so and Johnny, that's an awesome question. I've seen some awesome questions coming through the chat. We're going to get to them. I'm almost done. But I think this is the fun part of the presentation too, right? So when we think about those world populations, here it is, especially during times like COVID, you think about how all of the peak times online have essentially been thrown out the window, right? And what that means is we could just replace all of those peak times with we are all always online now. And that's really interesting from a marketing funnel perspective, because how does that change your tactics, right? You're probably going to flow certain things up and give them prioritization, just knowing you have a captivated audience for a longer period of time. Next cool stat. Okay, so purchase decisions. As a social media marketer in the infancy of my career, we always quantified our efforts by assessing ROI, right? And if that quantification if it ever took the form of, hey, we got 12 likes and a retweet, I would not have a job. Let's be very clear about this. So the way that we ground it in digital, the way that we measure our effectiveness is essentially using those tactics to determine where you are in the funnel, those KPIs that are attached to it. So sometimes people ask a question like, oh, what KPIs do I use for my marketing funnel? Well, it's a valid question, but at the same time, you probably want to look at the tactic that you're using within the phase. So for example, if you're doing a targeted email blast, well, your open rates are still going to dictate your success at that. And it's also going to dictate whether or not it's successful enough to flow into the next tactic. So that's how I want you to approach purchase decisions and thinking about that as well. The next stat is positively terrifying. And it's highly debated, but I still want to put it out here. Attention span. The opportunity now is shorter than ever to make your mark. So when we think about the attention span of a goldfish at 8 seconds, and the adult North American male was measured just at about 7.5 seconds, that's crazy. That's crazy. I know, as I said at the outset of this presentation, I'm amongst family. So obviously, you know, I can confess to you that I'm that creeper on the GO train of the TTC that's looking at your phone and how you're scrolling. And it's not, I know if you were like, oh my God, why did we get this guy in to do this presentation? The reason that I do that is not because I care what you're saying to your boyfriend or girlfriend. I'm looking at the user behavior and how they scroll. How many of us, as we scroll through our phones, our fingers and our screens never even come to a complete stop? That is the attention span that you are fighting with. So when you're talking about the importance of the awareness phase of the funnel, it is critical because you do not yet have permission to talk to this person, and the opportunity is about that big. Okay, I'm going to wrap up in about 5 minutes, but the last thing that I do want to say is future-proofing your strategies. One of the ways that you future-proof your strategies or ensure that you are not going back to your funnel and your tactics every few months is to look at things like growth rates. Look at the healthiness of the platforms that you're activating on. Are they antiquated tools in your tech stack? Do they plug into your CRM, into some of your other systems or not? Because if you don't know essentially how relevant something's going to be in a year or 6 months with how rapidly digital changes, you're going to have a bad time. Okay. Now, I've done a lot of talking, and I'm not exactly allowed to assign any of you lovely people homework, but in my experience with the marketing funnel, the real value here is going to be in taking what you've learned and doing a deeper dive by applying that knowledge. And I promise there are interesting ways to do this. Learning in digital can be so interesting. Now, before I go to the final 2 takeaways, I'll just pause right there and just say, you know, very simply, thank you for your attention. I really do appreciate your time, and I so wish that when we started talking about doing hashtag together, I was elated to come on campus and meet all of you in person. So, you know, we've adapted with the time. So kudos to the management team and to the marketing group for persevering and pushing it through. I think you guys have been tremendous, and I sincerely do hope that in the future we get a chance to meet and we become part of that growing U of T family. So before I get to the next 2 slides, please send me an invitation to connect on LinkedIn. And in that invite, I would like for you to answer me the following 2 questions. Okay. Now, TikTok. We all know TikTok, right? It's the supreme time suck. It has been an amazing send to me during the times of isolation. And it really, if you don't know what it is, it houses short mobile videos and provides a platform for creating, sharing, and discovering. It's basically like karaoke for the digital age. It's awesome. But what does this mean from a business perspective? If you're really going to apply your knowledge of what we learned today, I want you to reflect on what stage or stages of the funnel we've discussed, and including your invite to me on LinkedIn, where does TikTok fit in? How could it fit into your marketing tactics? Essentially, this is the part of us as really good marketers. I think rather than being a passive consumer, you want to be an active consumer. And when you think about that in the context of social media, it means that when you look at a message, you think, okay, what's the business angle here? What's the business purpose? What's the value prop? And with TikTok, I think there are a lot of people that have yet to define it. So by going through this exercise, whether you do some research or you just go through, the rabbit hole of TikTok, you are exercising some judgment here that I think a lot of leading brands in the world have not done it yet. Okay, so by doing this exercise, I dare say you are adding to your portfolio. So that is the first thing that I want you to do. What part or parts of the funnel do TikTok videos fit into? And then secondly, the other piece of homework that I have for you can be really fun if you're celebrity obsessed, and it's evaluating their strategies, okay? Now, I'm personally a late night fan, and tonight, if you were to watch, for example, I know you will simultaneously probably be on your phone and watching the segments, right? So essentially, I want you to think about this in terms of their online persona. Simultaneously, check out this whatever late night show you like. Check out the late night guest digital footprint. What marketing touch points do they maintain? More importantly, what actions do they ask you, the viewer, to take? Are they simply coming online to their Instagram and on their story, they're saying, hey guys, I'm going to be on Jimmy Fallon tonight, would love if you tune in? Or do they want you to watch them for some other reason? Are they selling something? Are they promoting a movie? A question that I used to get a lot was, wow, I haven't heard from so-and-so actor in so long, and now they're coming and they're doing all these things. I wonder why they went away. I think the real question there is, why did they come back? What are they promoting? And more importantly, where does that fit into the funnel? Where does that celebrity's marketing strategy consider you, the viewer, in that marketing funnel? So don't care which one you watch or really what you watch, but I'd love to hear some hypothesis on essentially what they're trying to get you to do. Okay, so I hope those are fun. As I said, that's really it. So there's a few things that I find as rewarding as coming back to U of T and sharing a little bit about my journey. And I said it again, and I'll just, I'll stand by it. You are some of the sharpest students that I've ever had the pleasure of speaking with. And I sincerely hope that today just serves as an introduction for us and a catalyst for conversation. So thank you all very, very much. Anurag, I'll open it up to you and to the floor if there are any questions. I know there are in the chat, but I'll pass it back to you anyway.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you so much. That was just fantastic, very informative, lots of learnings and tips for the audience. I didn't realize that I was going to be getting homework, but I know what my evening looks like now.
At least it's TV though, right? Like I didn't give you hard stuff. You get to go on TikTok and watch TV. I'm pretty cool that way.
Yeah, we've been getting a few questions in chat, and we got some time to kind of try and take some of those now. So let me pose the first one to you. So this one's coming from Arman. There is a thin line between tracking dark social and in quotes spying or being creepy. Do you think this line will continue to blur in the future? Do you see this line as a legal barrier to achieving true marketing potential?
Wow, what a great question, first of all. I think one thing that we look at with the infancy of tech and new tactics that come in, typically it's not that they become muggier over time, they actually become more defined. And if you think about social media, when I started at 3 organizations I've been a part of, I was the first dedicated resource to social media. I went from having a lot of conversations begging my leaders to even do social media because they weren't quite sure. They really thought the only output from it was 12 likes and a retweet. I'm serious. But what happens when more people embrace it? Essentially, it becomes more defined, as does the overall customer cycle. And as a result of that, it becomes more defined. So essentially what I'm saying here is dark social over time, as more people embrace it, we will get there. So will there be legal barriers? Will there be castle barriers? That's a very real threat to dark social, absolutely. But I don't think that it's going to get any muggier. In fact, I think we're gonna get some more clarity around what it can and can't do. Great question.
Thanks, Adam. The next one coming from Kim. What kinds of content should be uploaded in these crises as a company who seeks profits and building relationships with customers?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I pose this to the group too, we all have marketing messages that we hate. And I'm sure if you think right now to how you watch TV, there are a few brands who will remain nameless. Okay, fine. They'll remain nameless because I'm in a nice mood today. That essentially they are just shoving their message down your throat, right? And you're like, whoa. And similarly with email marketing strategies, how many brands have filled your inbox and you're like, oh, wow, I really was wondering what that shoe supplier that I haven't transacted with in the last 3 years was doing about COVID. Thanks for that. The important thing here is to focus, much like your marketing funnel, on the customer needs, the customer pain points, and the customer questions. That is the content that I am most receptive to now. And I encourage you, as you think about your marketing messages, put yourself in the shoes of your audience. Think about it from their perspective, especially in terms of search, right? Because if you can chock your content full of really good, rich keywords, for example, that you know people are prone to searching, you're probably going to increase your discoverability as well. But in short, it's about having that lens of the audience as opposed to the brand's message. No one cares about us as a brand.
Thanks, Adam. Next one's coming from Johnny. What would you say would be the catalyst that propels YouTubers and other influencers in 2020?
You know, it's so crazy because the realm of content creators is now so broad that I probably couldn't give you one answer that works. I do love consistency myself, so I love when a YouTuber, for example, tells me exactly what I'm going to learn up front, and then they stick to that with consistency. So if I'm expecting weekly content on Mondays and they deliver that, that's great. I hate people who are self-plugging to start their videos too. So if you're asking me to like and subscribe, I'm either buffering or I'm clicking off for the most part. So those who understand that drop-off rates on videos skyrocket in the first 5 to 7 seconds and they get right into it, that's another thing that you can do to earn my attention and earn my click. Essentially, I want, just like Google, I want to be matched with the information that I'm searching in as few clicks and as little time as possible. So whichever YouTubers are doing that, I think are the most effective to do. And it's not just YouTubers, right? Look at TikTok as an amazing platform for content creation. Instagram has been and will not go anywhere for that. Even things like Twitch streams, right? People are doing tremendous things from a content creating perspective, and there is no one template for success anymore, and I love that.
Great. Faizan wants to know, what is the one thing you really like seeing on a resume for digital marketing?
Yeah, and that's a more, I like to see a degree from U of T. I'm kidding. I'm not kidding, but I do. It does come up in conversations when I see that, and it's fantastic to have something that you can bond over. At the same time, I think I love seeing people who are very clearly self-starters. So they've got proficiency in a multitude of platforms. So for example, when I'm hiring for social, it's so great to see somebody who has not just worked in one tool for 3 years, but they've got Sprout Social and Meltwater and Hootsuite and Spreadfast and Chorus on there, and it just shows that they've got that hunger for knowledge. Because for many of the jobs and many of the people that I look at within digital, it's not 9 to 5 that has propelled them in their career. It's what we do as self-starters, the initiative that we've taken outside of work. And I go back to that anecdote about me in the classroom at U of T. It was so important for me to go home and be a self-starter on my blog, right? Those were the things that I was teaching myself at the time, and ultimately it became part of my portfolio. So I would say if you are, genuinely passionate about digital, embrace that and have that reflected in your tech stack and what you're showing on your resume. Great question.
Lots of nice questions coming in. The next one from George. How do you control the narrative that goes out and it reaches the intended audience? Is there a way to measure the narrative? For example, when Apple launches a new product, famous influencers may have negative reviews about the product, which may deter people to try the product.
Yeah. In short, George, I think control is a word that we're getting further away from. One of the things that I've learned through my career, and I'm happy to say I learned it the hard way, is that you as a marketer will create the message, and then once it's published, the community will do with it what they will. Okay. So you could have the Mona Lisa of marketing campaigns, but if the product that you're selling is subpar, do you not expect the community to out that? Do you know what I mean? So that is really at the core of what the community engagement is going to be. But the other thing that I want to talk about here, because you gave a great example with Apple, those influencers and the way that those are being measured by companies, it's changing, and it's changing rapidly. You've probably all heard the anecdote by now, so I'm not going to bore you, of the Instagram model who had 2.2 million followers, but she couldn't sell 35 shirts. Every marketer who was worth a damn at that point looked at them and they said, okay, well, can you tell to me the ROI of an influencer if they can't sell 35 units of product? And that really gave way to the emergence of the micro influencer program. I think that is what we're seeing now in the industry. We're not seeing big companies that necessarily need to drop hundreds of millions of dollars into influencer marketing so much as they can work on a micro level. And that's great, because I think it's very indicative of the way that Generation Z as well as younger millennials prefer to buy anyways, right? Like, I'm not going to the big faceless Coca-Cola Twitter account when I have a question. I'm probably going to look up a product owner on LinkedIn where I can see how long they've worked there and what exactly they do, and I may reach out by LinkedIn DM. That is the way that the world's changing, and I think this is a great example of it.
Great. Wu is asking the next one. For novel products like certain mobile apps, what would you say is the platform with the highest ROI to generate awareness in potential users, if there is one?
You know what? And there definitely is an answer to that, but it's so dependent on your industry that I can't give you one. I can tell you what works for me, and I can tell you that although I'm not a huge Facebook user, as an example, when I look at a question like this from what is the most cost-effective mobile app for me to advertise on, yeah, my cost per click is lowest on Facebook. So it's a key part of my online marketing strategy. If you ask me where my engagement is higher, it's definitely LinkedIn, right? So I think you have to look at your objectives and your industry, and then you're able to get an answer to that question. It's just too broad of a question for me to say one answer to.
The next one's coming from Daniel. How do we get the marketing funnel started if we are about to launch a new app? How do we gain awareness?
Oh, great question. So I think at the outset, as we've talked about quite a bit, you think about those prospecting KPIs. If your business problem at the beginning is awareness, what can you do to address it in terms of tactics? And more importantly, what are the measurements that you're going to use to determine how effective you are? I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So when you look at equations, for example, so how do you determine the research and response rate ROI? There's an equation that we have that we use, which is essentially your new response rate minus your old response rate, and you divide that by the hours spent on research. That will tell you essentially the increase in time that an agent has spent researching for that product. That's one way that you can do it. But I guess at large, what I'm saying is you need to ground your tactics and your objectives in KPIs, okay? Because when somebody in a business setting asks you how effective were you at moving down that funnel, you can hypothesize and say, well, I love the Instagram content that I put out, and I know social media fits into the awareness phase. But yeah, to what end? And what business objective are you accomplishing with that? How are you moving people down the funnel? So grounding it into various KPIs is a great example. We talked a little bit about email as well, right? So email open rate. So the number of emails opened over the number of emails sent multiplied by 100. That's another one to quantify your success when you're starting a campaign, right? Am I ready to move these people down to, say, a targeted email journey if my numbers aren't good enough? Probably not. So yeah, grounded in KPIs is sort of the short end of that answer.
Thank you, Adam.
You're welcome.
The next one's from Amelia. So she asks, what about the post-purchase? Once customers leave the funnel, how important is it to continue to nurture the relationship after the purchase, and how would you do this effectively to send them back up to the top of the funnel? She also talks about the flywheel model that she's seen, and your comments around that.
Cool. I'm going to go back to one of these slides because I think it says what I want to say beautifully, and that is right here. So at the bottom of the funnel, I don't think we should necessarily consider ourselves going back to the top of the funnel so much as nurturing that person who's a previous customer to become a brand evangelist, an advocate, or an ambassador. That's where they are. If they've had a purchase decision with us, what can we do to essentially make them take them from a one-time customer to a lifetime customer? So I don't think that we want to necessarily consider after the purchase decision, it being cyclical all the time. I think for a lot of people, we should really be focusing on how do we make sure that experience was so good that they want to tell their friends, right? That is the micro influencer model in practice right there. How do we essentially create a new level to the funnel where there's nurturing happening rather than going to the top? What we want to do with going to the top, the cyclical part of it, is to tell your friends. We want to introduce new prospective buyers to the top, and how they found out are from those brand evangelists. That is the objective that I would go for.
Awesome. The next one's coming from Hira. As a digital marketeer, how do you balance when to invest time developing a strategy, not knowing if something is a fad or trend? For example, many people speculate that TikTok is a fad, thus companies may not invest big resources, but also risk missing out on an opportunity to connect with the customer.
Yeah, so two things I'll say on this. Number one, and great question, by the way, here. Number one, never fall in love with your tactics. I mean, we work so long on a lot of our marketing initiatives that we do become very attached to them. But what's really important when we have an analytics lens on during the iteration for success portion of a campaign is that we are unbiased. If something else is working better for us to accomplish our business objective, do that. Similarly, I love this, the fads and trends of TikTok. Maybe the same was said about social media as an industry at large at one point. And what I come back to continually is to test doesn't necessarily mean to invest millions of dollars. You can test on a very small scale and see how effective it is. So my big advice to you is to just lean into it. Just jump into it on a very small scale, even if that means $0 investment and you're doing something organically, to see if it accomplishes what you think it'll accomplish. And when it comes to gut check time, just be really, really honest with yourself. I started in social media, but right now as part of managing a bigger portfolio, when we do a post-mortem on a campaign, I'm looking at social fondly, but if it underperforms versus other marketing tactics like say SEO or programmatic display, yeah, we shift dollars because that's the right thing to do. So I encourage you to bring that perspective to it as well.
I believe we've got time for one last question.
Okay, one more.
What marketing blogs or podcasts are your go-to favorites?
Go-to marketing blogs or podcasts, great one. So there's a reason I use TrackMaven for the digital funnel discussion today. I think they are fantastic. More broadly on search, Moz.com has always been my go-to. And in terms of podcasts, to be honest, mostly my friends. I love the small startup tech ones in Toronto. I've been a part of 2 of them in the past couple of weeks, so they're top of mind. So forgive me for the shameless plugs, but Ideas into Action by another U of T graduate, Hamza Khan, is an incredible initiative that I've loved. And there's another one called Stay the F at Home that I had an opportunity to be on, and it's all about just marketing in the age of COVID and how things have changed. Because I think what's really interesting is we've all got the microphone, right? And we're like, okay, who's the marketing expert? There's nobody living that's ever undergone anything remotely like this before. We're all learning together. So the most important thing to do is just cast that net far and wide, learn from your peers, and always have that critical lens.
Great. I have a few more questions. However, we don't have any more time left, and would like to close. I want to once again thank Adam and everyone else who joined us today, and we hope to see you all at our next hashtag event. Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.